"Put your hands inside my trousers, my hair will keep them warm," he said. She found something large. A cold wind moved through the leaves, whispering secrets only the lost could hear. Few dared enter and fewer returned, yet on this night a lone figure walked the narrow, shadowed path. Saren was her name. She had hair like molten silver and eyes that reflected the fading light of the moon. She moved cautiously, though not without purpose. Tonight she was not wandering. She sought something the villagers would never speak of aloud. The hidden palace of King Kalen, the ruler whose name had become a curse whispered in fear. The palace lay at the heart of the forest, where the trees thinned into a clearing shrouded in mist. Its walls were tall, dark stone, crowned with sharp spires that pierced the sky. Some said it had been built from the bones of fallen giants. Others whispered that it moved, changing its halls when no one watched. Saren had heard stories all her life, stories of a king who had lost his heart to a curse centuries ago, now trapped in a lonely, unbroken kingdom. She approached the gates, their iron twisted with strange symbols that glowed faintly in the moonlight. Taking a deep breath, she stepped forward. The air felt heavy, almost alive, pressing against her chest as if the forest itself tried to push her back. Yet she pressed on, driven by something she did not fully understand. A shadow stirred atop the highest tower. Saren froze, sensing a gaze that weighed like stone upon her shoulders. Then, as silently as it had appeared, the shadow vanished, leaving her alone with her thoughts and the forest's murmurs. At the entrance, the gates opened on their own, as if inviting her in. She stepped into a courtyard filled with statues, frozen in mid-motion, their eyes hollow and accusing. The marble had grown dark with age, and moss climbed like veins across the stone. The air smelled faintly of ash and cold stone. Saren's heart pounded in her chest. This was no ordinary place. This was a palace where time itself had bent, where sorrow had settled like dust on every surface. A sound broke the silence, a soft, melodic voice, distant but unmistakable. "Who dares enter the heart of Eldrith?" Saren's gaze darted around. The voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. She could feel its power, a quiet force that made her bones hum. I am Saren," she said, her voice steady despite the fear rising in her chest. "I have come to speak with King Kalen." There was silence, long and tense. Then from the shadow of the main hall a figure emerged. He was tall, with a presence that seemed both alive and untouchable. His hair was dark as midnight, and his eyes, oh, his eyes, shone with a light that was both beautiful and terrible. Saren felt her breath catch. She had expected fearsome wrath, not this. "I am Kalen," the man said, his voice deep, smooth, like rolling thunder in a quiet sky. "Few dare step here, and yet you come alone. Why?" Saren swallowed. "I seek redemption, for my family, for this land. And perhaps for you if it can be found." Kalen's gaze held her for a long moment, silent, measuring. The cold edge of the air around him seemed to sharpen. Then he spoke, softer this time. "Redemption. My redemption was lost long ago, before your time. What makes you think you can find what I have not?" "I do not know," Saren admitted, her voice trembling slightly. "But I must try. I cannot live knowing I did nothing when hope was within reach." Kalen's lips curved into a faint, bitter smile. "Hope," he murmured. "A foolish thing. It has betrayed me more than any enemy ever could." He moved closer, slow and deliberate. The shadows seemed to cling to him, curling around his form like living things. Saren felt a pull, a dangerous fascination she could neither resist nor understand. Her heart ached in ways words could not describe. She realized with a shock that this was no ordinary man, and she was no ordinary visitor. "You should leave," Kalen said suddenly, his voice low, almost a warning. "This place, it does not forgive, and I cannot forgive you." Saren's fingers tightened around the cloak she wore. "I cannot leave," she said. "Not yet, not until I understand, not until I know what is real and what can be saved." Kalen paused, studying her. Then, with a movement like smoke dispersing in the wind, He turned and began walking toward the palace. The gates creaked behind him as he disappeared inside. Saren hesitated only a moment before following, her curiosity stronger than fear. The palace interior was unlike anything she had imagined. Halls stretched endlessly, walls lined with ancient tapestries that seemed to move when one looked away. The air smelled of old magic, of power that had slept too long. Lights flickered, though there were no torches to explain them. Every step Saren took echoed as if the palace itself were alive, listening to her heartbeat. At the end of a long corridor, Kaelin stopped. A great archway opened to a balcony that overlooked the forest below, the mist curling like restless spirits around the treetops. He turned to her, his expression unreadable. "Tell me," he said, "why do you follow the impossible?" "Because the impossible is all that remains," Saren whispered. For a moment, Kaelin looked as if he might speak, but then he shook his head, a shadow of pain crossing his features. "You are foolish, but perhaps that is why you are still alive." A sudden wind swept across the balcony, and with it, a shiver ran down Saren's spine. From the forest below, a whisper rose, almost human in tone, calling her name. She turned sharply, but there was nothing but the mist. Kaelin's eyes followed hers, dark and deep. "The forest watches, and it remembers. Some things should never be disturbed, Saren, but now that you are here, you have already disturbed them." She felt a cold dread settle over her, but also an unexplainable thrill. She knew she had stepped into a world far larger and far more dangerous than she had ever imagined. Yet she could not turn back. Not now. Kaelin's gaze softened for the briefest moment, and he spoke almost like a whisper meant only for her. "If you are to stay, you must learn to survive what you do not yet see. And beware, the shadows are hungry tonight." Then, without another word, he stepped into the hall behind her and vanished, leaving her alone on the balcony with the cold wind and the whispering forest. Saren's heart pounded as she gazed into the mist. Something moved in the shadows below, something large, ancient, and aware. She could feel its eyes upon her, watching, waiting. And then a voice, soft and low, echoed through the night. "Do you dare touch what has been hidden for centuries?" Her breath caught. The forest was silent once more, but the sense of being observed remained, heavy as stone. Saren realized, with a mix of fear and awe, that her journey had only just begun, and that the forest, the palace, and the man she sought were all bound together in ways she could not yet understand. And above it all, the moon rose high, casting silver light over a world filled with secrets, longing, and shadows that would not forgive. The night in Eldrith lingered like a living shadow, stretching its fingers into every corner of the palace. Saren stood on the balcony, still shivering from the cold wind and the sense of unseen eyes. The forest below was silent now, but she could not shake the feeling that something ancient, something patient, was waiting for her. Her fingers brushed against the cold stone railing, and she felt the faint hum of power that seemed to pulse from the palace itself. Every heartbeat echoed in her chest, and she knew that the place was aware of her presence. She had never felt so small, and yet so alive. Kaelin had vanished into the depths of the palace, leaving her alone. She knew she should follow him, yet her curiosity drew her deeper into the hallways instead. The palace seemed to breathe around her, walls stretching and narrowing as if they were watching her carefully. As she walked, she noticed carvings along the walls, ancient symbols that seemed to shift when she looked away. Some glowed faintly, casting a soft silver light that barely illuminated the floor. She traced her fingers along one of them. It felt warm, alive, as though it had been waiting for her touch. Suddenly, a voice whispered in her ear, soft and urgent. "Saren, you should not be here." She spun around, heart racing. The corridor was empty. Only shadows moved with the flickering light. Her breath came in quick, shallow gasps. The voice had sounded familiar, almost like a memory she could not place. "Who's there?" she demanded, her voice trembling yet firm. No answer came, only the shifting of shadows and the quiet hum of the palace. She took a deep breath and forced herself forward. Something drew her to the great hall at the center of the palace, a space so vast it seemed impossible. Its ceilings were lost in darkness, and tall windows allowed moonlight to spill in like silver rain. Kalen stood at the far end of the hall, still as a statue. When he saw her, his eyes darkened, and he gestured for her to come closer. She hesitated for a moment before stepping forward, her boots echoing on the marble floor. "You should not wander alone," he said, his voice low, almost a growl. "This palace, it tests everyone. It twists them, feeds on fear and desire alike. Why do you risk so much?" Saren swallowed, her eyes fixed on him. "Because I need to understand. I cannot leave until I know what is hidden here and what you are hiding, Kalen." His lips pressed into a thin line. "Some things are hidden for good reason. Even I cannot confront them alone. You will see, soon enough, the darkness that walks these halls." Before she could respond, a sudden movement flickered in the corner of her vision. A shadow detached itself from the wall, twisting into a shape that was both animal and something else entirely. Its eyes glowed faintly red, and it prowled silently across the floor toward her. Saren froze, but Kalen stepped in front of her. The creature stopped, growled low, then vanished into the shadows as if it had never existed. "You are not ready," Kalen said quietly, though his eyes held a glimmer of something unreadable. "The palace can feel your heart. It knows your fears and your hope." "Then teach me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Teach me how to survive here." For a moment he said nothing. Then he stepped closer, and she could see the weight in his eyes, the centuries of isolation, the endless sorrow that had hardened him. "I cannot protect you from everything," he admitted. "This place, it takes what it wants and nothing can stop it. But I can show you how to walk through it without losing yourself entirely." He led her through twisting corridors, past doors that opened onto empty darkness or rooms filled with illusions. Each step seemed to test her courage, each shadow whispering doubts and fears. Yet Saren pressed on, driven by a need she did not fully understand. At last they arrived at a small chamber, circular and dimly lit by a single torch. The walls were lined with books, scrolls, and objects of power. Kalen gestured for her to sit. "Here," he said, "you can learn, but beware. Knowledge has its own dangers. It can illuminate or destroy." Saren knelt by one of the books, brushing dust from the cover. The words inside glowed faintly, written in a language older than she could read. Yet somehow she could understand it. The text spoke of curses, of power bound to sorrow, and of a kingdom trapped between life and death. "Your kingdom," she murmured, realizing the truth before he said a word. "It is bound by a curse." Kalen's face darkened. "Yes. And it will not be broken by words alone. It takes someone willing to risk everything, to stand in the darkness and face what no one else can." Saren's hands trembled slightly as she turned the pages. The knowledge was overwhelming, yet she felt a strange calm. She was beginning to understand not only the curse but the man who bore it. He was not evil, he was trapped, a soul weighed down by centuries of loss and isolation. "I want to help," she said softly, "even if it is impossible." Kalen studied her in silence. His eyes softened just for a moment. "You may not understand what you ask. To help me is to risk losing yourself. And yet, perhaps you are braver than I am willing to admit." The torch flickered, casting long, wavering shadows across the chamber. Saren felt a sudden chill, as if the walls themselves were watching, waiting. Outside, the forest murmured like a restless ocean. A sudden knock echoed through the chamber, sharp and unexpected. Both of them froze. Kalen's hand went to the hilt of his sword instinctively, though he did not draw it. "Who is there?" he demanded. No answer came, only the sound of distant, echoing footsteps. Saren's heart leapt. Something or someone was in the palace. Not the palace spirits, but a living presence. Kalen moved to the door, opening it slowly. The hallway beyond was empty, yet the air was thick with tension. Shadows seemed to crawl along the walls, twisting unnaturally. Saren felt a pull in her chest, a warning she could not ignore. "Stay close," Kalen whispered, his hand brushing against hers. For a moment Saren felt warmth, a fragile connection in the cold, unforgiving palace. They moved down the corridor, senses alert. Every shadow, every flicker of light seemed alive, waiting. And then at the end of the hall they found it, a doorway that had not been there before, carved into the stone as if grown from it. Kalen's eyes widened slightly. "This should not exist," he muttered. "No one should see it, and yet it calls to you." Saren stepped forward, drawn by an invisible force. The door opened into a chamber unlike any other. The walls were mirrored, reflecting not their images but their fears, desires, and memories. Saren saw herself, small and afraid but also determined, shining with a light she did not know she possessed. Kalen saw himself as he had not in centuries, alone, tormented, yet yearning for something he had long forgotten. The mirrors shifted, showing visions that were almost unbearable in their truth. And then one mirror cracked. Slowly, silently, a figure stepped out from the reflection, a shadow of someone or something they both feared. Kalen's hand went to Saren's shoulder. "This is the heart of the palace," he said, voice low. "If you survive this, you may find the truth, but if you fail," his eyes darkened, "you may never leave." Saren swallowed hard, her heart pounding. She looked at Kalen, and for the first time she saw vulnerability in him, a crack in the armor he had built over centuries. She wanted to reach for him, to hold him steady, but she knew the challenge was hers to face alone. The shadow in the cracked mirror moved closer, eyes glowing with cold light. Saren's hands shook, but she stepped forward. She could feel the power of the palace pressing on her, testing her courage, her will, her heart. And then, just as the shadow reached for her, the mirrors shattered completely. A wave of light and darkness collided, throwing them both to the floor. The chamber trembled, stone cracking beneath them. Outside, the forest seemed to roar, leaves flying like a storm. Saren struggled to rise, and Kalen grabbed her hand. Their eyes met, and in that moment words were unnecessary. They were bound together by fate, by danger, and by a power neither fully understood. But as they scrambled toward the hallway, the shadow reformed, larger now, more terrifying and blocking their path. Its eyes glowed with a hunger that was almost alive, almost human, yet utterly other. Kalen drew his sword, a blade that shimmered with faint silver light. "Hold your courage," he said. "If we survive this, everything will change." Saren nodded, gripping his hand tightly. The shadow lunged and the room erupted into chaos. The shadow loomed before them, larger than anything Saren had ever imagined. It moved like smoke and solid stone at the same time, its form twisting and writhing with each heartbeat of the palace. Its glowing eyes fixed on them, burning with a cold intelligence that sent a shiver down her spine. Kalen's hand tightened around the hilt of his sword, its faint silver light struggling to hold back the darkness. "Stay close," he whispered, his voice tense but calm, anchored by an authority only centuries of solitude could create. "Whatever this is, it tests everything, your courage, your fear, your heart." Saren nodded, gripping his other hand. Her pulse raced, yet amid the terror, she felt a strange thrill, a sense that this challenge was the key to understanding both the palace and Kalen himself. She had entered this world seeking answers, but now she realized that survival meant facing not just the shadows, but the parts of herself she had kept hidden even from her own heart. The shadow lunged forward, a mass of darkness that swirled and split like a living storm. Kalen swung his sword, slicing through one tendril of darkness, but another rose instantly in its place. Saren felt the chill of it brush past her, whispering doubts in her mind. "You are small. You are weak. You do not belong here." She shook her head, forcing her thoughts away. "I will not let it control me," she said aloud, almost to convince herself. Kalen glanced at her, a flicker of approval in his eyes. "Good. Strength comes from knowing fear, not ignoring it. Remember that." They advanced slowly, moving as one, their steps echoing on the cracked marble of the chamber. The shadows split again, creating multiple forms, each one a reflection of their deepest fears. Saren saw herself trapped, alone, drowning in darkness. She saw Kaelin, isolated for centuries, a king without a heart, a soul weighed down by loss. "You must face it," Kaelin said softly. "Do not run, do not hide. The shadow cannot harm what is not afraid." Saren drew in a steadying breath. "Then I will not fear," she whispered. "I will face it, whatever it is." The shadow's forms surged toward them, and Saren felt the weight of centuries pressing down on her, a force that seemed almost alive, testing every thought, every heartbeat. And then she remembered the words she had read in the ancient book the night before. The curse feeds on despair but cannot touch the light of a willing heart. She raised her hands, not to fight, but to show the shadow she was not afraid. A pulse of warmth spread from her chest, radiating outward. For the first time the shadow hesitated, its forms flickering like candlelight in a windless room. Kaelin's sword shone brighter, and together they pressed forward, their courage interwoven. "Keep moving," Kaelin urged. "Do not let it gain the upper hand." Saren nodded, her steps careful but determined. The chamber seemed to stretch and contract with each movement, the mirrors along the walls reflecting not just their images, but the light that surged from their hearts. Slowly the shadow began to retreat, shrinking and twisting until it was no more than a thin wisp of darkness at the far end of the hall. Kaelin lowered his sword, breathing heavily. "You have a rare courage," he said, his voice soft. "Even I have not seen it in anyone in centuries." Saren's chest heaved, and she felt a strange warmth in her heart, the first spark of hope since she had entered the palace. We survived," she whispered, still trembling. Kaelin gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "For now, but the palace has many tests. That shadow, it was only the beginning." They continued deeper into the heart of the palace, moving through hallways that seemed to shift beneath their feet. Each corridor was lined with statues, mirrors, or murals that told stories of kings, queens, and warriors long forgotten. Some seemed alive, their eyes following Saren and Kaelin as they passed. Others whispered faintly, echoing voices from the past. Finally, they arrived at a grand staircase that spiraled upward into darkness. Kaelin stopped at its base, looking up. "This leads to the throne of light," he said. "It is where the curse began, where my power and my punishment was first bound. Only there can the heart of the palace be faced." Saren hesitated, gazing upward. The staircase seemed endless, winding into shadows that no torch could illuminate. "And what waits there?" she asked, her voice small but steady. Kaelin's face darkened. "Truth and reckoning. The throne will demand your courage and reveal what lies hidden in both of our hearts. Many have tried to face it and failed. Few have returned unchanged." Saren took a deep breath. "Then I will face it," she said. "Whatever it is, I will not turn back." Kaelin studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he reached for her hand. "Good, because alone you would not survive. Together we may have a chance." They ascended the staircase, each step echoing like a drumbeat in the vast silence. Shadows danced along the walls, but now they no longer seemed threatening. Instead, they shifted to reveal glimpses of the past, memories of Kaelin's long life, his victories, his losses, his loneliness. Saren felt a pang of sorrow for the man who had been trapped in this world for centuries, punished by a curse he had not fully understood. When they reached the top, they entered a circular chamber bathed in silver light. In the center stood a throne carved from crystal and stone, glowing faintly as if it held a heart within it. The air was thick with magic, heavy and intoxicating. The palace seemed to hum, waiting. Kaelin approached the throne cautiously, his hand brushing the back of it. "This is it," he said softly, "the source of the curse. If we succeed, everything changes. If we fail, we are lost forever." Saren stepped closer, her heart pounding. She felt the energy in the room, a force both terrifying and beautiful pressing against her chest. She realized that this was more than a throne. It was a living entity, bound to Kaelin's soul and to the kingdom itself. Suddenly, the light pulsed, and the throne began to speak, not in words but in visions. Saren saw the past of Kaelin's kingdom, a king who sought to protect his people, a betrayal that shattered his heart, a curse cast in anger and sorrow that trapped him and the palace in a cycle of darkness. She saw Kaelin as a boy, innocent and full of hope, and as a man, burdened and alone. Tears welled in her eyes as she realized the depth of his suffering. "I understand," she whispered. "I see why you are this way, why the palace is like this." Kaelin's voice broke through her thoughts. Or do you see only what you wish to see?" His eyes were intense, searching hers, demanding honesty. I want to help," Saren said, her voice firm. "I cannot undo the past, but I can face it with you. We can try to break the curse together." Kaelin's face softened, a shadow of the man he had been centuries ago shining through. "You are brave, perhaps braver than I deserve. The throne will test that courage. Are you ready?" Saren nodded, though her heart raced with both fear and hope. She took a step closer to the throne, feeling its pulse in the center of the room. The light surged, filling the chamber, and suddenly they were surrounded by visions of their deepest fears, regrets, and desires. Saren saw herself failing, losing Kaelin, being trapped in darkness forever. Kaelin saw centuries of isolation, the faces of those he could not save, the weight of the curse pressing down. But then, amid the visions, something unexpected happened. They saw each other, not as reflections of fear, but as anchors of hope. The throne pulsed again, brighter this time. A voice echoed through the chamber, deep and resonant, as if the palace itself were speaking. "Only those who face the truth of their hearts may break the cycle. Only together may the shadows be lifted." Saren looked at Kaelin, her eyes full of determination. "We face it together," she said. Kaelin nodded, and for the first time in centuries he allowed himself a small, genuine smile. "Together," he agreed. The light of the throne expanded, engulfing them both. They felt themselves lifted, not by force, but by the magic of trust, courage, and hope. The visions intensified, testing their hearts in ways neither had expected. Every doubt, every sorrow, every hidden fear was brought to the surface. And then, just as they thought they might collapse under the weight of it all, the throne pulsed one final time. The light dimmed, leaving them standing in a chamber transformed. The shadows that had haunted the palace seemed to retreat, drawn back into the walls, the floor, the very stones. But before they could take a moment to breathe, a sudden crack echoed through the chamber. The floor beneath them trembled, and the walls began to shift. A new presence stirred, one older, darker, and more dangerous than anything they had faced before. Kaelin's eyes narrowed. "This is not over." Saren felt a chill run down her spine. The palace had revealed part of its secret, but something ancient and powerful had awakened. And now it was watching them, waiting for its chance. The palace trembled. Shadows twisted along the walls like restless serpents, rising from corners that had seemed safe, reaching toward the center where Saren and Kaelin stood. The throne's light had dimmed, leaving only a faint silver glow in the chamber. And yet, for the first time, the darkness felt less threatening. They had survived the trials of the throne together, but now a new, older power had awakened. Saren's hands were tightly clasped with Kaelin's. "What is this?" she asked, her voice steady though her heart raced. The air was thick with magic, vibrating with a force she could feel in her bones. Kaelin's jaw was tight. "Something older than the palace, older than the curse. It has slept for centuries, waiting. Now it knows we have changed the balance. It is testing us, seeing if we are worthy or if we will fail." From the shadows, a shape began to take form. It was immense, taller than any human, with eyes that burned like molten silver and a presence that made the air itself shiver. Its voice rolled through the chamber, deep and echoing, like a chorus of countless voices. "Who dares disturb the cycle of time? Who dares to bring light where darkness has reigned for ages? Saren felt fear press against her chest, but she did not step back. She could feel Kaelin beside her, and their bond gave her courage. "We do," she said, her voice clear and unwavering. "We seek to end the curse, to bring hope where there has only been sorrow." The creature's gaze swept over them, assessing, weighing. "Hope," it repeated, almost as if tasting the word for the first time in centuries. Mortals speak of such things, and yet they rarely survive their own desires. Kaelin stepped forward, placing himself slightly in front of Saren. "We do not seek our own gain," he said firmly. "We seek redemption for my people, for this land, and for ourselves. If this requires sacrifice, we are ready." The being tilted its massive head, and the shadows in the chamber coiled and twisted, forming visions that threatened to overwhelm them. Saren saw herself alone, wandering endlessly in darkness. She saw Kaelin, burdened by centuries of regret, reaching for a light that had always seemed just out of reach. And then she saw the palace itself, crumbling, lost forever if they failed. "You will be tested," the voice boomed. "Not by swords, not by magic, but by the truth in your hearts. Only when fear and doubt are set aside will you be free." Saren looked at Kaelin. Their eyes met, and for a moment words were unnecessary. They had come this far together, faced the palace, faced shadows and fears, and discovered courage neither could have found alone. They were ready to face the truth. Kaelin nodded. "Then we face it," he said softly. The chamber darkened suddenly, and the visions became vivid. Saren felt herself falling into them, a spiral of memories and possibilities that threatened to drown her. She saw herself giving up, retreating into fear. She saw Kaelin alone, hardened by centuries of isolation. But then she felt Kaelin's hand on hers, steady, grounding her. Together they began to anchor themselves in the present, rejecting the illusions that sought to tear them apart. "Do not listen to them," Kaelin whispered. "This is not reality. Only we can choose what is true." With a deep breath, Saren focused on the warmth in her chest, the courage that had carried her from the forest into the palace, the bond she had formed with Kaelin, the hope that still burned despite centuries of darkness. She let it spread outward, into the shadows, into the chamber, into the very air itself. Kaelin did the same. The silver sword in his hand glowed brightly, but it was more than the weapon. It was a reflection of his own heart, his own willingness to face the past and seek a future. The shadows recoiled as light and determination intertwined, pushing back the darkness that had clung to the palace for centuries. The massive being roared, a sound that shook the walls and rattled the floor. "You may have courage, but will you endure?" Saren stepped forward, holding Kaelin's hand tightly. "We will endure," she said, "because we choose hope, because we choose each other, because we choose to face the darkness no matter what it brings." The chamber shook violently, stones cracking and dust falling from the ceiling. The throne in the center pulsed with light, brighter and brighter, until the shadows could no longer hold. One by one, the illusions shattered, leaving only the truth. A man and a woman standing together, their hearts unbroken, their courage unwavering. The being before them shimmered, shifting from darkness to light. Its form became less threatening, more ethereal, and its voice softened. "You have faced the truth. You have faced yourselves. Few have ever done so." Kaelin's shoulders relaxed, the tension that had held him for centuries beginning to fade. "Does this end it?" he asked cautiously. The entity nodded slowly. "The cycle is broken. The curse that bound this palace and your soul is lifted. But remember, power and sorrow leave marks on those who endure them. You are changed forever, and the choices you make now will shape the future." Saren felt a warmth in her chest, the first light of peace she had known in a long time. She looked at Kaelin, whose eyes reflected both relief and wonder. For centuries, he had carried a burden alone. Now together they had lifted it. The chamber was still. The palace, once alive with whispers of fear and shadows, now seemed calm, almost at rest. The statues no longer moved, The mirrors reflected only their present selves, and the air was light, filled with the quiet hum of freedom. Kalen turned to Saren. You stayed with me through everything," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Through the shadows, through the palace, through the trials, I do not know how to thank you," Saren smiled softly. "You do not need to, we faced it together, that is enough." He reached for her hand, holding it as if afraid to let go. "Together," he echoed. "It is the first time I have felt that word in centuries, and it feels right." Outside, the forest seemed to sigh, the mist lifting as if the trees themselves had been waiting for this moment. Moonlight poured into the palace, no longer silver and cold but warm and bright, filling the halls with a gentle glow. Saren and Kalen walked to the balcony where their journey had begun. The air was crisp, clean, and alive with possibility. The shadows had retreated but not vanished entirely. They remained as reminders of the past, of what had been endured and overcome. Saren looked at the horizon, at the forest stretched beneath the moonlight. "The world feels different," she said. "Like we have changed it simply by standing here." Kalen nodded, a small smile breaking across his face. "Yes, but the world is only beginning. There is much to rebuild, much to heal, and we will face it together." For the first time in centuries, Kalen allowed himself to hope. And for the first time, Saren felt the deep certainty that she had not only survived the palace but had changed it, had changed him. They stood together on the balcony, hand in hand, hearts beating in quiet harmony, the weight of centuries lifting from their shoulders. The palace, once a place of darkness and despair, now glimmered with the promise of light. But even as the night settled around them, they both knew the truth. Life would still challenge them. The world beyond the palace still held trials and mysteries. Yet now they were ready. Together they would face whatever came, guided by courage, trust, and the bond they had forged in the heart of shadows. As dawn broke over Eldrith, the first light of day spilled over the palace, illuminating the forest and the kingdom beyond. The shadows were gone, not erased but softened, transformed by the courage of two souls who refused to yield. Kalen looked at Saren, a rare softness in his eyes. "Thank you," he said simply. Saren smiled back, her heart light. "No," she replied, "thank you. For letting me in and for trusting me with your world." The palace stood silent, majestic, and alive in a new way. They had faced the darkness, faced themselves, and emerged stronger. And though the journey ahead was uncertain, for the first time the future seemed bright. Together they stepped forward from the balcony, ready to leave the palace behind but carrying its lessons in their hearts. The shadows of the past remained, but they no longer defined them. The world awaited, and they would face it as one.